Welcome to the Don't Feed the Fear podcast, where we dive into the complex world of food allergy anxiety. I'm your host, Dr. Amanda Whitehouse, food allergy anxiety psychologist and food allergy mom. Whether you're dealing with allergies yourself or supporting someone who is, join us for an empathetic and informative journey toward food allergy calm and confidence. Welcome back to Don't Feed the Fear for part 2 of our discussion about relationships, dating, physical intimacy, and safely managing our food allergies. We were so fortunate to have Dr. Sicherer on for the first portion of this discussion to talk about all of the medical information and research and professional advice about what is safe and what can pose a safety risk for food allergies. And I'm so appreciative to him for sharing his recommendations and modeling how he discusses that with his patients. Sloane Miller and I were left after that conversation with so many thoughts about what we feel it's important to discuss and share on the mental health and the social emotional side of that conversation. So Sloane was so gracious with her time. She is back with me today so that we can continue to discuss and process this topic. And I want to give a little bit of a longer introduction for Sloane today. It's been amazing to get to know her, and I'm really excited to share her voice with all of you here on my podcast because she has so much to share with you. She talked briefly last time about her book, Allergic Girl, Adventures in Living Well with Food Allergies. This is one of the first books that I read about food allergies, and it was so helpful to me in terms of understanding what life might actually look like for someone living with food allergies. Obviously, the best tips and insights from someone who's been living with food allergies her entire life. And Sloane's just a very insightful, communicative person. Sloane has degrees in both mental health and in coaching. She sees clients and provides different kinds of support depending on what their needs are. She doesn't just work with food allergies, but of course I'm thankful for her voice and her experience on that topic here with us today.
So let's get started in talking about sex and food allergies.
Oh, where has your head been since our last conversation? We both had so many questions. There's a lot that we wanted to say that wasn't necessarily the medical end of things, but we just want to talk about the hows and the experience.
It's a very complex topic. There's so much that goes into it: family values, religious values, socioeconomic values, access to information, access to medical care, choice, and also orientation, sexual orientation, right? If we look at the spectrum of LGBTQIA plus, which includes people that are feeling asexual, not sexual, polysexual, right? And young people are grappling with, like, who are they within this spectrum? They don't know, and they're figuring it out. Mazel tov to them. Figure it out. However, like, then layer in, oh, exposure to your allergen. You've been told by your parents, by media, by doctors, can be harmful, at the very least, fatal at the worst.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was thinking of. This is very, very complex.
Yeah. The world is different now, but do you mind talking about what it was like to enter into that phase of life for yourself? I mean, obviously, all of those factors don't apply to you in the same way that we're opening up to the wide range of experience, but do you mind sharing just what that was like when you were young?
Sure. My childhood, there was no EpiPen. What I was told by my allergist is avoid your allergen. If you have exposure, go to the hospital. I remembered my first exposure to tree nuts and anaphylaxis. I remembered when I was 2. I had had previous allergic reactions when I was 6 months old that I don't remember, but I do remember the 2-year-old one, and that really informed my anxiety around exposure to my allergens. However, there was no conversation about smooches and allergens. So I didn't have that anxiety about a first kiss. And I want to layer in here that at that time in the 80s, the American diet was very different than it is currently in 2025. We're talking 30, 40 years ago, right? Somewhere in that range. As I've said, there were 2 types of M&Ms, peanut and plain, and I'm not allergic to peanuts. So there was no almond milk or cashew milk in the supermarket. Uh, maybe there was a nut loaf in a vegan restaurant in San Francisco, but that wasn't like a common situation. So kids were not walking around with granola bars studded with Brazil nuts. That didn't happen. They weren't snacking on pistachios during soccer practice. None of that was happening. So there really was no concept of like, I need to have a conversation with a boy and I'm cis het. As a woman, or as a young girl, I was thinking about boys and they weren't eating my allergens. They weren't eating, um, you know, they just weren't eating nuts the way that they are now. They just weren't. So, and actually, I was just thinking, I mean, there are certainly other cultures that do have a lot of nuts in their foods. Like if they were, let's say, Persian, let's say anywhere from like the Middle East, and at home, they probably would have had a lot of nuts. Um, but even, for example, my best friend, one of my best friends in like junior high was Venezuelan, and she always had her after school snacks were rice pudding made by hand, delicious, and also empanadas, beef empanadas. Did I ever ask what was in the beef empanada? No. Did I assume it was just beef? Yes. Was it? Yes. No. Although I was 13, right? Eating beef empanadas made by scratch? Yum, yum, yum. Oh, so I think I just want to like layer that out there that it didn't exist. It started to exist in my 20s and 30s. And that is when I started my blog in my 30s, because I was like, things have changed. And now I do need to have these conversations with partners about like, what are you eating? And if you eat this and expose me to it, there will be a problem. So very fortunately, my brain is already formed. I'm a fully formed adult there was a necessity to have an adult conversation about consent, about who are you, who am I, these are my medical needs, what's your reaction, to this potential partner. So, yeah, I mean, in college, again, EpiPens didn't exist. And once they did exist in the mid 80s, they were not prescribed. Saw my allergist every year. There was no prescription. So it wasn't until I went in the 90s overseas for college, part of my college education, and I asked my allergist, and this is in my book, Allergic Girl, but I asked my allergist, I said, should I have an EpiPen? I had heard about it somehow. And I was like, should I have one? And he was like, sure, couldn't hurt. So casual. Why not? Wow. Yeah. So in short, I had it real good. And like I didn't think about it, but like when it came to it, I had other concerns around sexuality and first kisses and second kisses and kind of all of and intimacy. It wasn't so much impacted by a food allergy question, unless there was a boy I liked and I wanted to kiss him and I saw him eating my allergen, which really didn't happen now that I think about it, until much later.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about, if you don't mind, what that sounded like for you as a fully mature adult trying to enter into that. And then maybe we can translate it down. You and I both see clients with food allergies. We can talk about what we're seeing with them and what we tell them, how to do those conversations.
Yeah. I as you were asking it, I was just like kind of rolling through my mental Rolodex of like, when really did I start having these conversations? And when I was sexually active in college, that's when I started having them. And they were very straightforward. I'm allergic to this. Please don't eat that, or I'm going to be nervous about kissing you. So I didn't even have like the medical information. There was, it would be decades before Dr. Sicherer's I think it was 2006 study about saliva allergens, peanut allergen and saliva came out. But decades before that, my conversation was, these are my allergens. Please don't eat that. If you eat that, I'm not going to feel comfortable. Something might happen. And that was a gut reaction. And I remember, just as you were asking that, I remember very specifically having that conversation with my college boyfriend, and and this was over in Europe. And he was like, okay, not a deal. Yeah. And I also cook, and I'd been cooking. I was a vegetarian starting at 16. And so my mother at that point was like, I don't know what to cook for you. And I was like, that's a really good question. I'm going to look it up. And I read a whole bunch of books about vegetarian cooking. And I started cooking more at home and making meals for the family that were really enjoyable. And so I was doing that in college as well. And so that probably also cut out some anxiety because I was cooking my own food when possible. And again, there were no 504 plans. There were, the colleges said it's mandatory that you eat our food. And I was like, no, I'm not going to. There was no dietitian on campus. There was no one to discuss this with other than, the dean, to be like, no, I'm not eating that. And they're like, sorry, that's our policy. And it's like, okay, I'm going to pay for food I'm not eating. And that's how we handled it. I was like, I'm just going to, I got housing with a kitchen, luckily, and I cooked my own food, and I kept a fridge in my room. I mean, this was just, I just handled it. Because there was no discussion, it was just like, okay, it was basically a more or less of a shrug from the administration, as long as it was safe. I didn't have a hot plate in my room. But yes, I did have that conversation. So that would be sub 25. So my brain is still forming, but the conversation I had was, these are my medical needs. And the response was very positive. There was no pushback. There was no, oh, are you sure? Or are allergies real? Or there was none of that. Mm-hmm. And so I also had very positive experiences. I didn't have any resistance to that. So that's an initial kind of college experience. And then after college, dating. I should say it was really similar. I am a direct talker. That's a family value, to speak clearly and directly with clarity. And I brought that into dating and romantic relationships, about, these are my needs. And it was very well received. It was, and again, I wrote about this in my book, that in my years of dating, and I started dating when I was 12, there's one guy that I can recall in my 30s who was a jerk. One. It's a lot of dating, a lot of decades of dating, and just to have one guy be a jerk. So, and again, I'm speaking from a heterosexual perspective as a woman dating men. For the most part, in fact, for 99% of it, I said, these are my medical needs. Please don't eat my allergen, or I don't know, something bad might happen, right? That was my gut feeling without a study. And boyfriends were like, what do I need to do?
We had this big, long conversation, like you said, all of the facts and the science, but really the way you said it is the bottom line. We shouldn't have to come into these conversations equipped with the data about how long and how many hours. As the way you described it the first time, is just, I'm not going to be comfortable around you if you're eating this. And it's not just about what the science says. It's about your comfort level and a partner showing you respect for your boundaries that you're trying to set with them. I know you and I both felt like that's the bigger topic here, is that this is part of consent. It's just another layer or factor of consent that should be respected as it should in every other way. And if that's not happening in relationships, kind of like the jerk in your 30s, that's a really good clue. That's an early sign of a red flag from that person that they're not respecting the concept of your consent, period.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
And I think when we talk about consent and boundaries, that's where it gets murky for a lot of people.
Right.
Heterosexual, LGBTQIA, it's not about gender. It really is about knowing what your boundaries are, knowing what you want, or even having an inkling and communicating that clearly. And then also being clear about where is your boundary? Like if that person was like, oh, but a little bit won't hurt, then what's your response? If they're like, oh, my parents told me allergies aren't real, what's your response? Right. And parents aren't teaching kids that because they don't know it. I don't think. You're a parent. Have you talked to your we're also very knowledgeable parent.
People understand now, and they might not understand the nuances of I want to feed your child, right? Like, what can I make when you come over and that'll be safe? And it used to be, thank you, we'll bring our own food. I've never had anyone, similar to what you said, I've never had anyone just be outright like, oh, allergies aren't real. I very, very rarely is it dismissive, doubtful, or do people challenge me about it? They just need more information. And yet, like I said, with the kissing conversation, if we don't give them the specific information, well, where are the studies that say, that happened? That's all the evidence.
Well, I think that is the food allergic person's fear that I just voiced.
Yes.
That the pushback is going to be like, you're making this up. This is in your head. It's not that bad. And specifically coming from a dude to a woman, you're being hysterical. The old, you're being hysterical line, right? It's not that bad.
Yeah.
I see this in my practice with parents in a male-female household, a heterosexual household, the father typically telling the mother, you're overreacting to our child's food allergy needs, or the food allergy, usually it's the mother who's witnessing anaphylaxis. The father doesn't see it and says, oh, you're overreacting. And so I think that fear definitely translates. To your point, how often does it happen in reality? In my experience, one time out of decades of dating, right? And all kinds of dudes. These are not like I just date like one kind of person cloned over and over. Like these are different dudes, different countries. Yeah, like these are all kinds of people. And it was just one guy who was kind of jerky. In my practice, this is the fear that I'm hearing.
Yes.
Is the different kinds of rejection that I will receive if I put my needs out there.
Yes. And I think to us as adults, it's so much easier, as it is with everything else, to look at those scenarios and say, well, if he says that, he's a jerk, don't date him. We kind of dismiss it. But it's such a tender age in terms of any sort of rejection, any sort of difference that makes you stand out and feel like you don't belong. So I think as adults, we really need to try to put ourselves back in those shoes and remember how vulnerable that is, because we're not wrong. Don't date that person if they don't respect your needs and your boundary.
It's hindsight and context that kids do not have. And it's like, oh, well, but maybe if I explain it better. There's a lot, again, and this is from a feminine perspective, but there's a lot of like, well, if, maybe it was just that day, maybe they were cranky. There's like a lot of excuse making for essentially bad behavior that should not be happening. And as parents, I imagine, and as adults, that's kind of like to watch a young person make excuses for another person's bad behavior and that goes across the board, about consent and boundaries and any bad behavior. There's no excuse for it. And you certainly do not excuse another person on their, do not excuse that. However, that happens also.
Yes.
A lot.
Yes.
and
And it has
everywhere.
to be sorted through by experience, like everything else, not just told by an adult. You and I were talking
Mhm.
about learning to drive before we started
Yeah.
chatting here. And just like that, I could tell my kid everything. Well, the gas pedal's here and you have to turn the wheel. Like they have to do it for themselves in order to learn. And this is one of those things, I think. We have to be there to guide them. We have to create an environment where they will talk to us because we don't just shut them down and say, oh, just dump him. Oh, he's a jerk. Just ignore him. Then they're going to stop talking to us about it instead of if we create this environment where it's open and we are guiding them and leading them into making their own decisions and taking ownership rather than still acting at 14, 18, like they should just listen to what we're telling them to do. They have to have agency over it.
How do you, as a parent, as a food allergy parent, and as a mental health professional, how do you create that?
Yeah. Well, I don't know about how well I'm doing as a parent. You can ask my kids because it's always so different trying to put into action what you know. But anytime I talk about communication with parents and kids from a young age into teenage and adult, the two things I say are everybody needs to learn better listening skills, particularly when we become parents. I don't think we exercise the best listening skills, but I think that's true of people in general, right? We listen to respond. We want to give advice when people are talking to us about things. A lot of not helpful listening skills are normal in our society, I think. So I think everyone everywhere needs to learn better listening skills. And I'm guilty of that too. I'm not making fun of everyone. It's so hard when your kid comes to you and it's like every little heartbreak for them is multiplied for you as a parent. You want to protect them from everything, especially when they're vulnerable because they have food allergies too. And we have to be open to their experience. We have to let them express it and make them feel seen and heard, not solve their problems for them. Which takes me into the second part. There's a book that I recommend for everyone, all ages. It's so old. It's called How to Talk So Your Kids Will Listen and Listen So Your Kids Will Talk. And I think it should just be called How to Talk So People will listen and
Mm.
listen so people will talk, because it's all about what I was saying before. It's written in comic strip style, demonstrating how we go into conversations with our own agenda, taking action, trying to problem solve, and how much more effective it is when we put people in the driver's seat of their own situations. I'm here to support you. What do you think? Let's try that. And so a lot to me of parenting is that. Do you want me to help you come up with some ideas of what you can try? What have you thought of? What are some of the ideas you thought you might do, or what have you thought you might say back to them? And really just guiding them through teasing it out and thinking through it, and then sometimes trying it. It's easier with like homework. Oh, okay, so you didn't do that report this time, you got an F. What do you think we can learn from this and what might happen next time? And then allowing them to carry that action out and learn it for themselves. And that doesn't just teach the specific skills, it allows them to step into the driver's seat of their own life and feel like they're in charge. I can make decisions, I can adapt, and this person will be here to support me, and I will turn to them because they're not just going to make me feel like I was wrong or I don't know anything by the way that they respond.
I love that so, so much. And it is so underutilized, as you said.
Mhm.
And, we're both trained listeners. Not everyone is a trained listener. And even the training that I had as a licensed social worker is different than that kind of listening. That kind of listening I learned in currently in ICF professional coaching, which is more about active listening and social work listening. Very different kind of listening. But I just want to highlight that what you said, and I want to underscore it, is at a certain age, and I'm sure you could do this from littles all the way on, appropriately. But the deep value of saying to a child, let's reason this out together. What do you think you can do here? What would you like to try? What have you tried? What do you make of this situation? Where would you like to go here? What works best for you? I want to add to that the challenge of mistakes when it comes to a food allergy kid and a parent who is watching that kid and the kid themselves. And I think that's where this, if we go back to the driving metaphor, right? Like mistakes, like are life and death in a car.
Right.
And that's why you want a lot of practice, and a lot of practice in a safe space, right? An empty parking lot, a driveway, an cul-de-sac, cars. So then you can, you do not put a kid on a major highway and say, okay, merge. You would never do that. And I have used this metaphor in my practice. I imagine you have too, about like, where can you give your kids safe practice to have a mistake? There will be mistakes. They have to have mistakes. They will learn from mistakes. We all learn from mistakes. But when you're talking about food allergies and there's a prospect of fatality, if it's not a good mistake or not a learning mistake, like what happens? And I think that's where everyone kind of gets really shut down.
Yes. And then I think avoids, and then to use the driving analogy, we're not really dealing until 3 or 4 days before the 16th birthday, rather than through across time. Because in addition to gradually increasing the severity or the challenge of the situation, it's over time, right? It's
Yes.
little steps over time.
Yes.
You mentioned practicing in a car when you were 14. By the time you got to that point where you were actually behind the wheel, you were comfortable in the car. And I think we're really going to wring everything out of this analogy that we can. It's true. This doesn't start when, like I've got a 13-year-old, but we've been talking about this and he's been rolling his eyes and not wanting to hear about it for years now. And it's other similar situations that aren't necessarily about kissing, but it's about how do friends respond, all the things you're saying about gradual practice with where the stakes are a little bit lower.
Yes. And parents have to allow for that. And kids want that. They want to show mastery. They don't want to have mistakes. However, we as adults know that they're going to have some to be like, okay, that's the wrong path to go down. Let me try this. And that includes emotionally.
Yes.
I want to date this person. They're a jerk. I want to see if I can fix them.
Right.
And then they need to try and fix them. And then they need to see that that jerk is eating their allergen and then like coming up to kiss them. And they need to practice that boundary and either let themselves be kissed and see what happens. And that's where the parents, role and job is to make sure their kids understand their food allergy diagnosis, have access to their medication, know where it is, have access to a parent, guardian, so they can coordinate if and when, have an open line of communication if there's a mistake so they don't feel embarrassed and shut themselves in a bathroom, right? Which is also a very natural response, by the by.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are so many layers of kind of pre-work.
Yes.
There was a really interesting study maybe 10 years ago about the transfer of responsibilities. And it was asking allergists, when do they think that should start? And essentially it was like by ages 13, which is what Dr. Sisher mentioned, their expectation is that kids are carrying their own medication. Now, I have to tell you, many kids in my practice and many parents are still carrying the medication for their children into high school. What is the message that sends to the child? So where does personal responsibility start? When does that come in? Obviously, every family is different. Every child is different. However, there are choices to be made. When are you going to start to transfer responsibilities, emotional, physical, medical, to your child who is the one who is managing their health and their chronic condition of atopic disease every day?
Right. And I always tell the parents that I'm working with, we have to always be in the moment and keep our child safe now and have our eyes forward on the goal, which is for them to be you, right? This fully, obviously independent, full life adult. The goal is not for us to be protecting them forever. And You mentioned a word that I love to use when I talk about this is the layers. When we say transfer of responsibility, it's not this one big package that we hand over to them. There are many, 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 many layers. People will talk about the Swiss cheese analogy. There are going to be holes in each layer, but if we have multiple ones, then there is protection. And layer one might be the way that I did it was we just have the epinephrine hanging by the back door. And my son had his own pouch that was kind of kid friendly for him to grab and put in the backpack. I was still carrying it, but he would grab it and put it in the backpack. Little did he know I already had one in there, right? That's the layer, but he's learning to grab it. I don't just trust that he's going to do it, right? So then that's one layer that gets transferred over really young. And then, there are other layers, layer after layer, like you said, safe adults, wherever they go, forms of communication. You talked about hiding in the bathroom. That's another layer that I've done with my son. Like, I don't ever want you to be embarrassed to speak up to anyone around you if you need help. And I know there will be times that it will be hard to. And we do that safety signal. For us, it's just a little emoji that we've agreed. If I ever send you this, it means come and get me right now, no questions asked, right? And I will take the burden as the parent without you having to make an excuse to remove yourself from the situation. It's just another layer and another tool that I can provide to him to help him, like you said, take the responsibility.
Yes, well said. I was also thinking, as I was actively listening, I was also thinking about transfer of responsibilities in that at kindergarten, age 4, I was carrying my inhaler in school. Now, again, EpiPens didn't exist yet. Epinephrine existed. Let me just clarify. Epinephrine is a very, very old drug, World War II. Epinephrine as the emergency drug for anaphylaxis, that has existed. It was an auto-injector that hadn't been created yet.
Right. It was a violent syringe before.
Correct. It was also, yeah. But now you can inject yourself. So, but I had asthma starting at 4, and I was in kindergarten at age 4. And I have very distinct memories of carrying my inhaler because I had asthma during the day. Like, they would run us around in gym class and I would have an asthma attack. And it was just very normal. And I would just take my inhaler and, and move on. However, what I was thinking of is that I already, as a 4-year-old, had medical responsibilities to myself and had to know when to use this. And so, just to layer that in terms of my own trajectory and kind of layering in bringing other medications around the world with me was like not a big deal because I had already been carrying my inhaler and using it and knowing the signs of an asthma attack from a very, very young age. So there was like already a lot happening.
You just reminded me of something that's so important. I know a lot of kids who carry and teenagers who carry their medication, but they still call mom if they think they might need to use it. They don't feel confident in deciding these are the symptoms. I know my body needs this. So I think that's another layer that's important to think about is.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Do you see that with your client?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I was like, did I even go to the nurse's office? I'm sure I went to the nurse's office at some point. I mean, like I was very friendly with the nurse. She was lovely. Was one of those kids that like absolutely hung out in the nurse's office. But I was certainly empowered to take my inhaler.
Mm-hmm.
And let's look at that word. I was empowered to take my inhaler. So, how do you, as a parent, empower your child to trust their own body to know when they're having a reaction?
Right.
Because calling your parents when you're having a reaction, that is time.
Right.
What if you can't reach them? Right. First of all, also no cell phones existed. Like let's also knock this out. So I had to physically go to another building. I grew up in the city, went to school in the city. The nurse was in one location. There were 2 buildings where my school was housed, and the nurse was in the lower school. So, if I was in gym in the upper school, I would have to win my ass to the nurses, talk to the nurse's office, which is crazy. And then like get care there, right? But I'm just thinking now about like, yeah, I think that is such an important layer for a child to know and feel empowered to medicate themselves and also know that there's no downside. There's no downside to taking extra epinephrine. There's no downside to taking an inhaler. There's no downside. And I'm not a doctor. Speak to your allergist or your pediatrician. But these are not addictive drugs. They are not, if you don't have the thing, they're not going to do anything to you.
Right. But there still is, and I think maybe that's another one of the layers to work on that really relates to this, but still is this fear around using epinephrine. I'm hoping that the needle-free options are going to shift this, but people do hesitate to use it. They don't want to have to use it, but obviously they're so safe. I think that's another thing that has to shift, and that starts really, really young, to everyone have this idea of that epinephrine is your best friend. Absolutely. Just go to it. Epi first, epi fast. Always. And not to be afraid of it. Find security in it and know that I have it. I can use it whenever I want. It's okay if I use it and it turns out maybe I didn't need it. It's better to do that.
I want to layer in denial.
Yes.
So I am 100% guilty of this. Well, I don't know. Guilty is not the right word. However, this has certainly happened to me where I'm in the middle of an allergic response and I'm like, is this really happening? I can see it. I can feel it. There's still like, is this what I think it is? Is this progressing? And I know because I was a child growing up with this, that I had many of those experiences where I'm having deep conversations with myself about what is happening to my body right now. And there's a lot of denial that comes into play. So I want to put that out there as a barrier to treatment, to self-treating. And that also might be why, kids are told, call your parents to kind of check in, or they think they need to check in because they're not quite, or I saw this, I can't tell you how many times in my practice, children don't recall the first anaphylactic experience. They've been told about it, but they don't actually have a memory of it.
Right.
Or it happened through testing and they haven't had a direct experience. So there's either some disbelief or denial that it's real, or there's no memory of it. So it doesn't seem real, right? Again, because my first anaphylactic experience that I remember was at 2, that was a very traumatic experience and I carried that forward. So I was very like, oh, don't want to do that again. And I remember very distinctly what happened, including going to the hospital. Like, it was not fun. I'm fine. Thank you. But I think for a lot of kids of the last, like, say, 2 generations, a lot of them either didn't remember a direct experience or it was through testing and they hadn't had a direct experience. So they were told by parents that this is what needs to happen. And so there is a layer of communication, disbelief, denial. Do I need this? Is it happening? So there's, right. I wanted to just bring that up.
I appreciate it. I think it's a great point. How do you get yourself through it? How do you move through the denial when it's happening?
So I check in with my safe people.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see hives? I feel like I see hives. Do you see hives? I can call a doctor if I need to. I mean, I think I medicate. That's the thing. I mean, ultimately I medicate.
Mm-hmm.
And there are layers of medication too. So for asthma, I take the inhaler. Like there's like, if I'm having even like a little, even asthma shows up in multiple different ways. And this get into too long of a conversation, but asthma I treat. Allergy depends. It's like if it's a little itchy eye and it's like, I don't know, a pollen-y day, I'm like, do I want to take an antihistamine and be kind of sleepy? It's localized. It's not going anywhere.
Right.
If I believe I've had exposure to my allergen and I've ingested it,
right,
and I think I'm having some kind of response, I do a whole like body systems check. And fortunately, usually it hasn't been anaphylaxis. When it has been, I'm at the hospital immediately. And and they've injected me with epinephrine and all the good drugs. Did I answer your question?
You did. And it's making me, because I was thinking about, I feel that too as a parent. What do I do? You have internalized through so many years of experience what I think a lot of us do. I keep our two systems handout physically in everywhere the epinephrine is stored, because even though I know that in my head, I'm not in my child's body like you are feeling it, but I need, in that moment of denial when the adrenaline kicks in, I pull that out. And if I can point here and point here, okay, we've got skin, we've got
two systems done.
two systems. And if I have a physical reminder in front of me, it's a little bit easier. That is another tool to empower. You don't need to call me and ask me. If you're not sure, pull out the sheet and look at it. And you know what you're feeling in your body, right? So like you said, to learn to go through that decision-making process yourself and to give kids tools to do it without us there seems like a good approach.
I'm going to add 2 more layers to that. So I print mine out and it's on my fridge.
Great.
And I go through it with my doctor every year. And everything changed.
Right.
Probably changed my entire lifetime, but just here, possibly changed. I also share it with friends and family. As an adult, my friends and family know what to look for. Or if I come in and I'm like, I'm in distress, do you hear that? Are you seeing? And they're like, yep. And I'm like, okay. And it's like just a very clear. And safe people. So I talk about this in my book. And what I've done is I have created around me safe community. And by safe, I mean emotionally safe, right? So parents, partner, best friends, doctors who I can ask questions that this might be a silly question, right? I can ask the doctor and be like, what do you think about this? Like, where do you stand on this? I can say to any of my safe emotional people, I feel like I'm having some anxiety around this, but also like I feel like I might be symptomatic. Can we just sit for a minute while I do a systems check and like see what happened? I don't think I had exposure to anything. This could be anxiety. It could be unknown exposure. Can we just sit together? And the answer is yes. And I have talked with these people ahead of time. This isn't like in the moment. This is you create a safe person by having these conversations when you're not having an emergency about what to do in case of an emergency, both physically, medically, and emotionally. And I talk about with my clients, depending on the age, either creating safe community around them or identifying safe community. If I'm talking with someone in their 20s and 30s, we'll talk about who in your life is emotionally safe for you to talk about your anxiety with, but also if you're having anaphylaxis and you need a buddy, like who is that person? If you don't have a person, let's talk about creating one. And then with littles, and littles being any age that has a friend group, talking about how do you identify safe people? How do you know that they're safe? How do you feel inside when you're with them? How do you want to be treated? How do they treat you? What do you say? What do you actually need from them? And this is going to be my final point here is knowing and understanding your medical diagnosis is first and foremost. You need to understand it. You are the one that's managing it for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. What you're looking for is support. Don't need someone else to, maybe you would like someone else to give you the EpiPen. However, you are fully capable of doing it. And I had a client who at age, how old was she? Maybe she was like 13 or 14. And she was going to her first school dance. And this was like the first kind of away home situation where there was going to be food, her allergens might be there, her friends were going to be there. And we talked through kind of all of the safety protocols that she had in place. And at the end of our safety protocol discussion, she said, it's okay. I have my own back. And that is, I get chills every time I think about that. That is what I want for people with food allergies to understand and to fully believe and fully enact that you have your own back, both emotionally, physically, in intimate situations, in work situations, emotionally, and medically.
That's perfectly said. We could talk about it for hours. And in most of it, what we're finding, which wasn't even our plan, is everything that's specific to this conversation about intimacy and relationships and physicality and food allergy safety really is about these bigger picture concepts that we're talking about that go so deep, and that the end result isn't just to have a boyfriend or have a spouse, right? It's about what you just said. It's about my identity as a person. Do I have my back? Do I know who I am and how to handle myself? And then obviously relationships are an important part of that. We talked about teens trying to sort that out. That's an important developmental stage. It's not just about if they can have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. It's about that process that's ongoing of sorting through who am I and developing an identity as a person.
Yes. The bigger statement is about having your own back, and that knowing that you trust yourself to make the best decisions with the information that you have at the time, that if something does happen, you know how to handle it, whether it is an emotional exchange, an intimacy exchange, a medical exchange, an accidental exposure, that you have the tools or know where you can get the tools in order to make the best decision that you can at the time. So having your own back, I think, is just a great overall thought to leave with.
Perfect.
That's what I would want for my clients, from littles all the way up to adults who are coping with food allergies, to understand that they have their own back.
Great. That's perfect. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this. I love where the conversation took us that we didn't necessarily plan out.
Thank you. It was really interesting to walk down memory lane. I hadn't thought about it in a while, about how many aspects of my childhood lead to, young adulthood, and all the different pieces and layers of me and medical me that added up to a certain point. And so that was a fun one.
I appreciate you being willing to share it with us.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you so much again for joining us for part 2 of this conversation. Thank you so much to my guest, Sloane Miller, for your idea and your correct insight that this is a really important topic to be discussing. Thank you again to Dr. Sicherer for joining us for part 1 of this conversation. I hope that this will be some helpful information. If you want to keep learning, you can read Dr. Sicherer's book, The Complete Guide to Food Allergies in Adults and Children. You can read Sloane Miller's memoir, Allergic Girl. And you can reach out to me for the free guide that I've created for you based on this series of talks to help you navigate these conversations and situations. You can access that by following me on Instagram at the Food Allergy Psychologist and messaging me asking for the free guide, or you can visit my website at thefoodallergypsychologist.com and reach out to me through the contact option. If you are finding this content helpful, it would mean so much to me if you would subscribe and follow the show, give the show a review, and share it with other people who might benefit from it too. I appreciate you listening, and we will talk again soon. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you have any questions about your own medical experience or mental health needs, please consult a professional. I'm Dr. Amanda Whitehouse. Thanks for joining me. And until we chat again, remember, don't feed the fear.